So just in case you're wondering whether you're at the right place, yes, you are. Here is the Better Business Gender Transformative Approaches in Agricultural Value Chains webinar organized by IDH. And we have a fantastic lineup of panelists today from Mastercard Foundation, Acumen, and IDH. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation. I'm going to promise you that this webinar is not going to be another one that is filled with slides, but it's really about dialogue, about conversation with tough questions to answer. So something to look forward to. So perhaps before we start, a brief introduction about myself and also the agenda. So I'm your moderator today. My name is Zhiren Ye, and I'm Innovation Manager on the Gender and DEI topic at IDH, and have been active in the field of social and environmental impact in my past year in my whole career. And for today's agenda, we can expect to first kickstart with a keynote speech on the gender equality for better business. And then we're going to dive into the panel discussion where we spend time to discuss about the practical strategies for gender transformation in agricultural value chains. And then we're going to leave plenty of time and spaces for you to have interactive Q&A sessions with our panelists. So here will be the full go-through of today's agenda. Let's not wait no more. I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Mariah Bomsma, to give us setting the scene. So Mariah is our Program Director of Strategy and Insight Unit of IDH. Mariah, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Kiran. Hi, everyone. Also, on my behalf, a warm welcome to this very important webinar. Things are changing rapidly around us, and gender equality has always been an important topic on our agenda, but desires maybe even more attentions of ours right now. So let me give you a little bit of an introduction speech. I'll try to do it quickly so there's more time for discussion. So across global value chains, structural barriers and socio-cultural norms limit women's access to resources, agency, and economic opportunities. And this not only affects the livelihoods of millions of women, but also business growth and longer-term sustainability. So let this sink in. Women represent 41% of the global agricultural workforce and 37% of the global manufacturing workforce. Yet they are 50% less likely than men to access productive assets and services. Closing the gender gap is therefore very important for farm productivity and agri-food systems wages. By investing in that, we could increase global GDP by 1% and reduce food insecurity for 45 million people. These reflect real opportunities for transformation. Beyond economic benefits, gender equality is becoming a regulatory and consumer-driven necessity. We see this, for instance, by the enforcement of international regulations, such as the European CSRD and CSDDD. And even though they have been delayed or weakened a bit lately, they are still on the agenda and a key driver for IDH to work with companies. Businesses that fail to integrate gender considerations into their models risk non-compliance, reputational damage, and exclusion. So in conclusion, the reality is very simple. Gender equality strengthens and sustains commercial outcomes, while inaction poses tangible risks on us, on our companies, on the farmers everywhere. But gender equality cannot be achieved through service level adjustments or compliance checkboxes. It needs much more than this. Gender disparities requires transformative solutions, ones that challenge harmful norms, reshape structures, and embed inclusivity into governance, leadership, labor practices, corporate culture, and household dynamics. At IDH, gender equality is not a side issue. It is cross-cutting in all the programs that we do at every level. the gender transformative business models is one of our 3 gender strategic pillars, alongside gender-based violence prevention and gender equitable living wages. We are momentarily preparing for a new multi-year plan that will start in 26 and will last till 2030. We are setting very ambitious goals in this new multi-year plan. 100% of our programs will be gender intentional, while 40% will be gender transformative. And I actually asked the question to Ziren, okay, is that ambitious? Well, if we look at what we've done the last 5 years, it was 10%. So from 10% to 40% is definitely a big step. And of course, we hope to go much further than this. But we also require time. We know that we can do this, and we are building upon best practices from the past. So let me share 2 powerful examples, at least, I think. Firstly, the Women's Safety Accelerator Fund. In 2020, IDH, together with Unilever, Twinings, Taylors of Harrogate, Tesco, and the Ethical Tea Partnership launched the Women's Safety Accelerator Fund with the aim to tackle gender-based violence in India's tea industry. With 900,000 women workers in tea estates, many faces harassment and discrimination, harming both their well-being and business performance. Gender-based violence was found to cause 10% absenteeism and an annual revenue loss of 5 to 7% due to lower productivity. Through the Women's Safety Accelerator Fund, we took a gender transformative approach, integrating peer learning, capacity building, and mindset shifts to challenge harmful norms. And the results are compelling. To name a few, gender-based violence reduction mounted up to 71%, absenteeism dropped by 3%, and men's support for survivors rose from 20 to 85%. One other example is the Grains for Growth program, a 3.5-year program designed to build inclusive, economically viable grain supply chains in northern Ghana. Through private sector partnerships, the program facilitates women's access to land, inputs, and services to build stronger economic positions in grain supply chains. And in addition, the gender transformative business models were introduced to businesses in those value chains, helping them to change business practices for longer-term impacts. The program, all in all, delivered 103,000 work opportunities, and the gender transformative results speak for themselves. 100% increase in SME employment capacity and prioritizing women and youth in that. But also companies invested 20 million in supply chain operations, 49% directed to women farmers and workers. Women smallholder farmers have secured access to land, bundled services, even in hard-to-reach communities. So we're building upon these examples also for our new strategy and new programs that we're currently developing and fundraising for. Having said that, today, sadly enough, gender equality is facing increasing backlash in many parts of the world. And that makes joint efforts, for which we are hopefully also here today, more crucial than ever. At IDH, we recognize that real change requires this collective action, because a unified voice speaks, of course, louder, and collaboration drives deeper impact. We need to seek for cross-sector and cross-organizational dialogue on gender transformative action. Acumen and Mastercard Foundation, who are with us here today, are also doing this. They're actively working to advance gender equality in agricultural value chains, and we'll hear much more about that later in this webinar. We are therefore very happy to have you here with us today. This webinar is more than just a discussion, I hope. It is an opportunity to exchange knowledge, align our strategies, and showcase practical tools that businesses and practitioners can use to drive real change. One of these tools is the Gender Transformative Business Model Innovation Guide, which we've launched this year in the IDH Gender Month. So that can be accessed by everyone, and we will hear more about that as well in this webinar. Let me finalize by saying that by working together and learning from another, we can maximize our collective impact and push gender equality forward. Let's use the space not just to talk, but to find actionable solutions and foster collaborations and commit to real transformation. So once again, thank you for being here today. Let's make this conversation count, and I'm very much looking forward to the next hour or so. So thanks, Irene, back to you.
Thank you so much, Maria. This is such an insightful keynote speech. If there's something that I can take away from your speech, I really say that you emphasize about the important role of women. That not only because they are the major workforce in the agricultural value chain, but also they bring value commercially and also social impact. We also see that there's disparity, there's inequality still within our society, but there's also solutions that we can explore. And I think that really set the scene for this webinar, that we are exploring the solutions, we are exploring the conversation to see how we can contribute to this important cause. Thank you so much, Maria. Right, just also a few notes before I go into introducing our panelists. So this webinar will be recorded, and please also write down your questions in the chat if you have any comments or questions. We'll collect them and then answer them at the end of the Q&A. I also already saw that somebody was asking whether there will be slides. So as I mentioned, this webinar will not be another one that's filled with slides. It's really about dialogue, and that's why there will be a lot of questions and difficult questions for our panelists to answer. And it's the goal of this webinar is to really generate this conversation, to really bring insights and evidence through our conversation. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to bring us to the webinar itself. I would love to introduce our panelists. We have a fantastic lineup today. We have Esther from Mastercard Foundation, Caroline from IDH, and Oscar from Acumen. I would like to give you, all of you, a very brief 2 or 3 minutes to introduce yourself, about your role and also your organization. May I invite Esther first?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody, and thanks, Jiren, for the invitation. I'm really humbled and privileged to be able to participate in the panel. My name is Esther Dasanu, and I lead our work on gender at the Mastercard Foundation, where we are focusing on enabling young people to access dignified and fulfilling work. The foundation has committed itself to enabling 30 million young people in work by 2030, and a minimum of 21 million out of that 30 million will be young women. We work across sectors, but agriculture plays a major role, of course, especially for young women. So let me stop here, not to go into the conversation just yet. Jiren, back to you.
Thank you, Esther. Really, really nice to have you today. I'm very curious about, what Mastercard Foundation is doing, and I think we'll learn more in the later. Right, Caroline.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Caroline Gommans, and I'm the Director of IDH Intelligence and Business Analytics. And there we collect and analyze farmer and company data. So both the qualitative and the quantitative, so both the narrative and the numbers, to generate more and better investments into smallholder agriculture. And beyond data, gender equality has been a personal passion of mine from a very young age, probably a bit inspired by my dad. And I really look forward to our discussions just now. And I think it's really powerful to be in a space where we can work together to really achieve some gender transformation in the agricultural value chains.
Thank you, Caroline. Last but not least, Oscar.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are in the world. My name is Oscar Kome. I'm an investment associate over at Acumen, at the Acumen Pioneer Fund. What we do is we invest in early stage companies focused in agriculture, energy, and education across value chains that support the bottom of the pyramid. So I'm really excited to bring some insights that we've been learning in that work here, especially along how we've been seeing gender transformative approaches in agricultural value chains. I have a few interesting case studies of what we've done so far, so I'm really keen to share that with you.
Amazing. Thank you all for being here. I'm quite surprised that you gave such a brief introduction of yourself, because I know you have rich experience and knowledge. And but I think we'll find it out later when we have the questions. So thank you again for being here. Right, let's dive into our conversation today. So as I mentioned that we are not going to have a slide deck, so I'm going to stop my sharing. And then we are going to have like real interview format for this session. Yeah, so when we talk about women's role in agricultural value chains, I really want to understand first about the role of gender equality. I think to set the scene to really help our audience to understand as well why is gender equality important in this sector. So perhaps my first question is to Caroline. I know that integrating gender equality in business practice is sometimes considered as like extra cost, extra burden, and I really wonder, is it the case, and is there any data or evidence that can prove that there's a business case of promoting gender equality in agricultural value chains? Caroline, you are on mute. Yes, you're on mute.
Now I'm unmuted.
Great.
So thanks, Jiren. So at IDH, our gender work is rooted in the belief that if we want to transform markets, we also must address some of the systemic inequalities that continue to limit both the potential of women as well as the growth potential of agricultural businesses and the sector at large. So we work with partners on different themes. One is equitable living wage, another one is gender-based violence, and the third one, the focus of today, is on gender-transformative business models. And that really means improving women's access, agency, and control of the key assets that are needed to play an important role in the agricultural value chains. And integrating gender equality, to get to your second part of your question, is indeed sometimes considered a burden, but I think it is comes from a fact that companies don't really understand women. And I'm sure that the moment you are starting to collect gender disaggregated data, you will start seeing patterns and differences between men and women. And that gives then very interesting insights in different needs. And it will be key to dive a bit deeper and really understand that, to be able to grab that opportunity. Now at IDH, we have been working with quite a few businesses on this. And we have been collecting quite systematic data. And what we do see is quite some clear cases of where there's a benefit for businesses. So I will focus on three of those. One is increased productivity and profitability. The fact that women often have less access to land, less access to finance, less access to knowledge, inputs that they need, mechanization services, often limits their potential. And it's one of the big reasons why the productivity of women tends to be lower. Now, a lot of value chains actually, or a lot of companies who want to source produce from farmers, they leave all these women behind, and all the supply that they can secure from these female farmers. So if you want to get a more reliable supply, I really recommend you to look at women. Then we also have a lot of companies who are providing services to those women. So that is another big opportunity that we have seen. Then we also see that businesses who source or serve more than 30% of female farmers actually have lower costs to serve. And there can be different reasons. It's sometimes a bit specific for a value chain, but there are also very likely some other reasons around the fact that women tend to work quite well together in groups. So you can have a last mile question, how do you reach these individual farmers? Becomes a bit easier to solve. And we also see that female clients are often more loyal. So you can retain the same sourcing or serving the same women, and you don't have to keep on investing. So that's another important reason for lower cost to serve. And then we also see that access to finance is really key for any smallholder farmer. To increase that productivity. And when you offer that service, we also see that the repayment rate of female farmers is much higher than the repayment rate of male farmers. So, they're not only social wins, they're also really measurable business gains of serving female farmers. Back to you, Ziran.
I think that's really insightful. There are a lot of data and evidence in what you just mentioned. I really see that you emphasize about the different needs, those strengths and those characteristics of between men and women, and by tailor our intervention or also to really address the needs and these characteristics, we can bring out the social case, also the impact case, the business case. From these interventions. And I think you mentioned about one thing about the gender disaggregated data collection. I think that's also key in understanding these different needs and strengths, and to also tailor your intervention in that. So that's a really great insight. Thank you so much, Caroline. Yes, I know that Acumen has also been doing quite a lot in this field, also working in the intersection between gender equality and also agricultural value chains. So I wonder, Oscar, do you also recognize what Caroline just mentioned? Is there any additional points that you would like to share with us, both in terms of social impact case or business case?
Thanks a lot, Jiren. To be honest, I thought that Caroline had peeked at my notes when she started speaking. The interesting thing is that there's a particular case, the two cases that we've seen a significant uplift in revenue or in volumes sold in agricultural value chains. I'll give you two examples. The first example is in Soko Fresh. We generated a gender action plan to improve sourcing of fruits and vegetables in Soko Fresh. So Soko Fresh is a cold chain. I'd say it's a startup that focuses on cold chain distribution of fruits and vegetables from smallholder farmers across markets in Europe, as well as across the retail chains in Eastern Africa. And they have put in as part of the agenda to transform their agency network, which is the network which collects fruits and vegetables and sources fruits and vegetables from smallholder farmer families, to become 40% women. It's currently at, I think, 12%. We're doing annual reviews to make sure that they hit their target in the next 2-3 years. And the impact that women have had on that value chain has been nothing short of remarkable. We've seen them collect more fruits and vegetables from these families, increase farmer income within those homes, increase the livelihoods out of the incomes that are sourced into those homes, and increase profitability for Soko Fresh as a business. So it's not just making sense from a business perspective, it's also making a lot of sense from an impact perspective. And it's one of the stories that we're very happy to be part of. The next story that's really, really interesting is Coconut Holdings Limited that runs the Ken Taste brand, which is they basically harvest coconuts and export coconuts as a raw product and process and sell coconut sourced goods across retail, coconut sourced and processed goods across retail centers across East Africa. And one of the interesting initiatives that they took up was hiring women as village buying agents. For those who've not had the opportunity to buy a coconut locally from a village, it is a particularly male-dominated value chain. And implementing that gender action plan with them revealed some really interesting insights. The first interesting insight that was there is that women were more honest coconut salesmen. So they'd buy the full quantity and there'd be no losses in the middle of the value chain. So the buyer would get the full value of what it is they've bought from each of these families. Families would be paid an honest amount of wages. There'd be no deductions or middleman losses that would be affected within those agency frameworks. So there was a sense of integrity when women were making the purchases. The second thing that was really, really interesting is that we just didn't get enough women because not enough were riding motorbikes. If they could ride more motorcycles, there'd be more women in the coconut value chain. And so we found that women were willing, there was a willingness for women to actually participate in these value chains. It's just that there were certain cultural barriers towards expanding them. But the return was much more predictable income for Coconut Holdings. And on top of that, we saw an increase in women leadership in women's farmers groups in the coconut farms. So because women were finally buying from other women, we saw a 33% increase of women leadership in farmer groups, which is a remarkable story. So Caroline, thank you so much for sharing that piece that we could elaborate on.
Amazing, Oscar. This is really, really exciting, cases that you share with us. I really hear that both Caroline and Oscar, something they mentioned that I also noted down here is that involving women really build a more reliable and resilient supply chain, also value chains. And I think that's something that is that really bring the values to the table, right? And of course, you also mentioned a lot about the challenges here is that women often face a lot of barriers, both in terms of culturally, also socially, economically, and that's why breaking down these barriers to give them access to resources, to services, will really help to empowering women and men to also for example, you mentioned about women leadership that is really boosted after having access to these platform resources. So that's a really, really exciting cases to learn about. So thank you so much, Oscar. So Esther, you're coming from slightly a different perspective, right? You're from the foundation's perspective, and I really wonder why is it important for you, for foundation, Mastercard Foundation, to work on gender equality in agriculture. And I also know that, I did some research. I know that Mastercard Foundation also has a specific focus on the young women. So I also wonder whether you also see there's a unique challenges that young women face in this sector.
Thanks, Jiren. And yes, following on Caroline and Oscar's contributions, I was going to say we come at it, to your point, slightly differently, in the sense that we did research, if you will, at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, to, if you will, identify in our journey of accelerating access to work for young people, and most importantly, young women, what were the sectors where young women were most likely to, one, find work, and ideally thrive in those sectors. Interestingly enough, agriculture came up as the #1 sector to be the largest employer for young women. And by the way, for us, young women are women aged 15 to 35. Now, the one thing that was mind-boggling not even to say alarming, was the fact that while young women were most likely to find work in the agriculture sector, it was the one that actually paid the least and was the least dignified and fulfilling. And so while we're talking about, you know, productivity and profitability, which is absolutely true, the question is, you know, who are we talking about when we're talking about these women, and what are the differences and the challenges that they face, right, in the agriculture sector that would lead them to stay in it and make it one that produces dignified and fulfilling work for them, or that would cause them to actually leave the sector. And interestingly, I just came back from Côte d'Ivoire, from Abidjan, where we were doing field work and met with young women in the acheke value chain. And acheke is basically cassava couscous, let's say. And it was interesting, first and foremost, the level of, if you will, community barriers they had to overcome in order for them to even be able to produce in the amounts that we're talking about, in the volumes that we're talking about, and then based on that, even grow within that value chain. Young women were not given the agency, but yet, if they were, one, given the agency and the voice, second, the equipment, third, the access to land and to the produce, and then, of course, access to finance and access to markets, they would have the ability to quickly turn this particular industry around. Now, one thing that dawned on me actually is the fact that in Côte d'Ivoire, acheke is like the staple food, right? It's just like rice. And so it's also passed down from mother to daughter, right? So if these young women are actually not equipped, if they're not given the agency, if they're not given the equipment, et cetera, what happens to the crop in a few years? Right? And so it dawned on me that, you know, as we're approaching the agriculture value chain or value chains and looking at the products that are consumed on the African continent, making sure that young women are actually at the center of the value chains and are also, if you will, enabled to grow along the nodes of whatever value chain we're talking about, is really critical, because there's actually a future that's linked to it, right? And so based on that, the foundation has taken a more intentional approach to really ensure that all our programs are actually young women centered. If we're going to look at young women in a given value chain, the first question that we're going to ask are, what is the role that these young women are playing in the value chain? Are they playing a role at all or not? And I really liked Oscar's example on the coconut being, you know, a male-dominated value chain, and the, you know, the example of women being more honest, et cetera. But then the question that I would pose is, how do we make it a more women-friendly value chain that young women would actually have proper access and can find work within the value chain? Interestingly enough, in the same country, another young lady that I met a few years ago is actually doing work, and she calls herself the queen of coconut, by the way. She's taking coconut waste and has transformed it into charcoal that can be used. So it's more environmentally friendly. She gets a higher revenue from it. The young people, because she works both with young men and young women, interestingly enough, are getting a much higher income from it. So it is possible, but it requires us to have a more intentional approach towards, if you will, carving out the spaces for young women to be able to participate. Jiren, back to you.
Such a fantastic stories that you have told us. And I really like that you mentioned about this intersectional perspective to see young women's strength and also struggles in the agricultural value chains. And what you mentioned at the beginning, saying that the young women, they usually take up the major workforce in agriculture, but also they are the one paid the least. So that's something that is really shocking. That reminds me of one of the programs that I have worked on in the past when I was with Oxfam. We also see the same thing that in the agricultural value chains, in many situations, men are still considered to be the main workforce. But then when they migrate to the city due to urbanization, which whatever, women are kind of like left behind to take over this production work. But then because they are never really valued in terms of their productivity, because their innovation due to culture and gender norms, so this value really lost both in terms of societal value, but also business value, right? So as you mentioned, that really giving them the access to really helping them to creating an enabling environment for them that can really bring out the innovation part, bring out the productivity, profitability of the workforce. So thank you so much for this really insightful story. Now that's fantastic. We have a great start. Right. So when we talk about, we have these challenges, we have this inequality, we talk about also the gender transformative approaches that this is the focus of today's conversation, right? We learn from the evidence and data that gender transformative approaches improve gender equality. So I want to understand a bit more from you, how can business apply gender transformative approaches and what it is actually? Right. So before maybe we go into the conversation, let me just give a brief, general definition about gender transformative approaches. So in general, there is like I think a key word here is the gender transformative. The key word here is the transformation. So what is that different from gender intentional project, for example, where you simply involve men and women in the activities? Gender transformative approaches address the root causes of gender inequality. So it really helps to tackle, for example, harmful and rigid gender norms and roles, to also improve the individual capacity due to lack of access to land, resources, services, and also to change the harmful institutional rules and practices such as discriminatory legislative and policy frameworks, and etc. So gender transformative approaches aim to address these root causes. So that's what makes it different from the other approaches. And this will lead to gender equality, which further results in business and impact case that our panelists just mentioned. So perhaps the first question I would like to also actually get back to Esther. So what are some successful gender programs or interventions that Mastercard Foundation has been supported or is supporting to build a gender transformative business? Yeah, can you share something with us?
Sure. Thanks, Jiren. Before I share the example, actually following back on your definition, I think transformation and to be gender transformative requires us to understand who's the human that we're dealing with, right? And very often, to your point, we find that we're kind of saying, okay, we're going to focus on women or young women, but our approaches tend to be very, general, when women are actually very different than young women, are very different than young men, are very different than older men, right? And I see somebody in the chat said, well, what about the reproductive roles and the need and time constraints of women when it comes to this? These are roles that are not going to disappear, right? The question is, as we're building a program, how do we take these dimensions into account to transform the ability of this young woman to contribute, to participate, to be productive, and to drive profitability upwards, right? Same thing with mobility, same thing with access to education, and so on and so forth, which tend to be the barriers that pretty much impede young women from moving forward. How do we take into account, one of my favorite topics is access to land in agriculture for women. If women don't have access to land, young women have even less access to land. But yet, we've known that access to land is a problem. We've talked about policy forever, but yet access to land remains a problem. So a question again is, how do we do things differently and take the fact that this is a challenge? And so in the Grains to Growth program, actually, Caroline, which was implemented together with the foundation, there was such a case where this woman was having trouble getting women that she was working with to access the land that they needed to produce fonio in Ghana. Okay, difference is that she actually reached out to the village chiefs and said, there's all this land that you find no longer productive. So since it's no longer productive, will you allow the women to plant on it? Will you actually say something that gives permission to the women to plant on it? And because it was no longer productive, of course, the chief said, okay, yeah, go ahead. They planted fonio and the production was so great, right? That men now started seeing that actually there was a different way to man the land, to work the land, to nurture the land, that it would still produce something out of it. And this was thanks to the women. Because the chief had given the word, well, he allowed, right, the women to continue to produce on it. So it shows that in order for us to become gender transformative, I think it's not just about, saying we want to do something for women and we want to give them access, but it's really taking on their realities and integrating it in the way in which we program, integrating it in the way in which we solution in order to get to, a productive and profitable outcome.
Thank you, Esther. I just love that you keep reminding us about this intersectional approach. And I really love that you mentioned when you talk about transformation. So it's really about transforming, how we're understanding the rules, the roles, the values. And that really requires us to have a radical, critical reflection of, the reality. And I just love that you mentioned about, taking their reality into consideration. And I think that's the transformation that we are really aiming for. So thank you, Esther, for reminding us of that. I'm moving to Caroline. I know that IDH has doing quite a lot of, business innovations and tools. And I would like to ask whether there are tools or business solutions that you can share with us on how business can adopt gender transformative approach.
Yes, thanks, Jiran. Yes, and we have done quite a bit of work based on some systematic analysis, which we all are publishing on the FarmFit Insights Hub. And the most relevant guide is actually the Gender Transformative Business Model Innovation Guide. So it's a tool, or it's a guide which really shows who benefits in which way from implementing these gender transformative business model. And it also has a lot of case studies and concrete examples on how to do that. It also tells you a bit about the do's and the don'ts, like Esther already mentioned. Realize that not all women are the same. You need to segment groups according to different criteria. Age is one of them. Aspiration level is another one. And sometimes they also, we also have quite highly educated women in agriculture, and you have people who have actually not even finished primary school. So there's also a lot of diversity there. So that is also something that is important to tailor your interventions to. So that that innovation guide, I really recommend you to have a look at it. I think one of my colleagues will share a link to the guide, and it also points you to some other specific interventions that we have seen working. And Esther already brought up the access to land issue. Now, IDH in Nigeria started working with female cassava farmers on block farms. So in this case, it was not the village chief who gave the land, but it was land owned by the company. They said, okay, this piece of land we allocate for cassava production and we invite smallholder farmers. And interestingly, the productivity and the loyalty of the female farmers is much higher. So the growth in when the block farm grew further, the number of female farmers also grew because it just made more business sense. Well, some of the tips, the do's and don'ts on block farms can also be found in a specific innovation guides that deals with that. We also have seen seed multiplication being a topic which is specifically interesting to reach women. So there's also a case study on that. And then IDH has also a partnership together with CGAP called ABERA, which combines the focus on women with also the need to make farmers more climate resilient. And we currently have an expression of interest live. So organizations who are interested to find out more or to implement gender transformative approaches, I really welcome you to express your interest, and we are selecting a new cohort of companies to work then jointly on how to implement those models. And you will also find some nice blogs with nice examples from our first ABERA cohort that you might find useful. Yeah, there are many other tools and resources on the FarmFit Insights Hub. We are continuously updating them. There will come an innovation library in a month from now. You will be able to also find which innovation is relevant when you want to be gender transformative. So yeah, let me pause here and hear from Oscar.
Thank you, Caroline. Just want to sum up a bit about what you mentioned. Could you also share the links to the FarmFit Insight Hub and also ABERA, the call for interest in the chat, so our audience can also take a look. But thank you so much for sharing these tools and the cases. Actually, I want to give another shout out to the Gender Transformative Business Model Innovation Guide, which I had the privilege to co-author with my colleague Juan Carlo. So I think it's a really great guide that we developed. It's not the ultimate guide, of course, to guide gender transformative approach, but it's a first step in the effort to really build the concrete steps, strategies, tools built on data and insight. So it's a really data-informed and data-driven innovation guide. Then I hope that it also help you to get an understanding of what gender transformative approach is and how you can implement them. I also learned about the block farm. Actually, is also a fantastic model. I remember there's one case that block farming, this model really gave the women this ownership and agency in the agricultural production. And once it was implemented, there were also a lot of young women, also women from urban area that migrate back from their villages to conduct this block farm model. So you really see this echo what has mentioned already, that once you create such an enabling environment that you enable ownership and agency, then you see how women can utilize their knowledge, skills, innovation to really contribute to the production. Yes, Oscar, I would like to also know from you that what are some success stories that where companies apply gender lens in their practices. Could you share some examples with us from Acumen's experience?
Yes, sure. First of all, thank you so much, Caroline and Nesta, Marianne, for the amazing context within which gender lens investing or gender lens programming operates. I think I've learned a lot during the course of this call as well. So as I dive into this first example, I think Marianne's already mentioned the coconut value chain as being particularly male dominated. And I'm happy to hear that there's a queen of coconut somewhere that we need to meet. Yes, I'll take a look at Coconut Holdings a little bit longer. That was just a teaser as to what their impact and their business yield was when it came to applying a climate gender action plan in partnership with Acumen. I'll give you an example of something that we rarely see in early stage investing in the agricultural sector, and that's putting diversity in your capital expenditure and how transformative that looks. And it was something as simple as including gender-based bathrooms, gender-based locker rooms into their value chain as a business. So Coconut Holdings, as previously discussed, sources coconuts from local smallholder farmers, processes this using a factory, and using that factory dispenses these Kentaste products. In Kenya, we call them Kentaste because anything Kentaste is coconut. These Kentaste products across the retail sector in Kenya. So we found that with Coconut Holdings, they made this investment in gender-based bathrooms, and the impact was something, it seems so small, but it transformed the employee experience. Employee absenteeism was a massive problem on the back of the fact that women did not feel obligated to come to work during certain times of the month. It dropped from 15% all the way down to 2%, thereby boosting employee productivity significantly. The second thing that was interesting to see is employee satisfaction shot up from 10% to 25%, which also then later transformed the customer experience and satisfaction of the Coconut Holdings enterprise from 10% to 27%, which was this is double-digit jumps in productivity metrics across a company by making such an investment where we're calling it diversity in CapEx. Something really interesting also was that they added maternity leave and flexible employee options within the company. Something, again, we don't see in early stage companies in agricultural value chains. And that then, again, continued to boost productivity and joyful ratings among its customer rankings. Another piece that was really, really interesting is how this particular startup, we awarded them a grant to take on this work. Typically, startups usually have the CEO walk in and design the program. But for the first time, we saw a full team buy-in where the entire senior management, middle management, including women, spoke deeply about how they'd want the capital deployed to improve the quality of life for the employees within the firm. We also made sure that they added harassment violations within the agenda policy, agenda harassment and violation policy, GBVH policies within the company. And that also brought a lot of satisfaction within the organization. And that also meant that this increased retention rates among female employees, especially highly educated female employees who were contributing serious metrics within the company. So really, really, really transformative in that sense. And then in closing, when it comes to the coconut value chain, de-husking coconuts and climbing coconut trees is one of the biggest risks. If you've ever had the pleasure of having a coconut, please know that there's someone who's climbed a 10-foot tree to get a coconut. And to increase more women in the coconut sourcing value chain, CHL is currently exploring the planting and growth of dwarf coconut breeds that will allow women to pick coconuts at waist level. So you can imagine how much more productivity we'll have created and how much more value we'll have created. I'm seeing Emma asking me about, do we have a study on all these aspects? Coming out soon, Emma, coming out soon. We've been working on it for this call. So yes, so that's the first piece. Also, before I close on Coconut Holdings, they used that CapEx, like that diversity in investment, they use it to buy PPE that would take away the risks associated with de-husking coconuts. This is typically a male-led activity where you shed the skin off of a coconut so that it can be ready for processing or harvesting. So using the investment, they increased the amount of safety equipment within the business and trained women to use this equipment so as to reduce the risk of harm, thereby including them more in the value chain. So we've seen suddenly a significant transformation in their participation during the coconut harvesting, sourcing, manufacturing, and exporting process, where women are touching the coconut all through the value chain. All right, so that's case study number one. Please let me know, Jiren, if you'd like me to stop. So the second case study is...
wrap up in 1 or 2 minutes, that'd be great.
Thank you. All right, the second one is the Soko Fresh fruit and vegetable value chain, where we've seen, I mentioned it briefly in passing, a desire to transform their agency framework into 40% women. I cannot understate just how powerful this is in terms of the impact metrics across rural families and rural family livelihoods. Because the thing that happened that was particularly transformative and an immense story is that women started sourcing from women, which means that more families were directly empowered due to the behavioral finance around women in rural areas who are looking for access to markets and selling their produce. It means more children went to school, more homes had their bellies full, and we also saw more sustainability when it comes to sourcing fruits and vegetables across these value chains, even during seasonal downturns, because you can imagine the fruit and vegetable value chain is particularly difficult during low seasons, during the drought and drought periods. And so they implemented training sessions to ensure that women were particularly trained on how to properly store and distribute fruits and vegetables. That led to a very, very resilient supply chain. So those are the two examples that I have for you today, Jiren. I wish I could bring more. The topic is particularly interesting. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Oscar. I really love all the examples that you have given, and they are fantastic examples. And I also particularly just want to say about the beginning. You mentioned about the gender-based locker room and also bathroom, such a small intervention that results in the transformation in the business. I think that also really echo what Esther and Caroline mentioned. Really take into consideration of the reality of people that we work with, and also giving them access to these platforms and services. Yeah, thank you so much. I actually have a $1 million question for all of you, but we have a lot of questions from our audience. I think that's a great engagement. So I'm going to shift my agenda around. I'm going to first invite our audience to invite our panelists to answer some of the questions from our audience. Maybe if we have time, we'll have these multi-dollar questions at the end. Yeah. Also, I want to say thank you to Mary, my colleague, who is so kind to help me collect these questions. So we have 12 questions so far. That's quite a lot. I'm going to pick some of them. Perhaps we can just, please, the floor just open. I invite our panelists just jump in to answer when you have a thought. Maybe the first question is quite relevant, yeah? How to measure the impact, or what is the framework to measure gender transformative? I think that's quite a difficult question.
Yeah, I saw the question indeed, and I think how we have been able to do it. Let me speak for that, and it's not always that cheap, but I think it is important in the beginning phase when we really want to ensure that the impact is not negative, but actually really contributes to women's empowerment. So what we have done is that we did farmer surveys where we have been asking questions to women about, have you gotten increased access to land, increased access to financial services, but also look at decision making at household level. Has that increased? So that also talks a bit more about the agency. So we also collected as part of our standard M&E, and like how many people get access to finance, etc. But we try to go one level deeper by also making sure that we hear the voice of the farmers. And another thing that we have done, and which is always very important, is to focus a lot more also on some qualitative aspects. So we are doing a lot of focus group discussions, bringing women together, also sometimes bringing communities together to better understand the dynamics. That is really important. And I also know that there are also really many other instruments that can be used. So we also use the farmer surveys as an end line, like how has your life improved given your relationship with this company. So they are also, and I know Acumen is doing something similar. So that is also something that is really useful. And what I would like to stress here is that there are two edges to this. One is measuring the results, which comes to accountability, and sometimes is requested for donors. But I think when it really works well is when it's integrated with the own monitoring of the company, and if it is linked to the business goals as well. And if you have a very good retention rate, so people continuing to supply you or people continuing to use your services, it's a really good indicator that that service is useful. So it's also good to sometimes think a bit more from those indicators and ways of measuring.
Maybe, Jiren, I can just add one more example in terms of measurement. So for the foundation, because we're looking at enabling young people into work, and as I was saying, agriculture has the lowest pay. It's like way, way, way below minimum wage. So for us, the first indicator is, are you able to access work in a dignified and fulfilling way? And the first measurement to dignified and fulfilling is minimum wage plus 10%, right? Because it's at that level that you have at least the ability to manage yourself and your bare, ideally your minimum, right? That it requires for you to live. But then the second step is, how much are you able to contribute? How much are you feeling like you're making impactful contributions at household level, at community level, especially. And here you can use quality of life, if you will, as a measurement. So over time, how much is your quality of life increasing? Your ability to access education for both you and your children, your ability to access health services at the level that you want, right? I think are also additional things that we can measure. And also the agency that you have within your community, because we find that when young women in rural areas, and most of them, a large part of them, happen to be in some form of agriculture value chain or another, you find that with the confidence building, the agency, et cetera, it has an impact on their family relationships, if you will, right? So relationship has changed with the spouse. At community level, they have more voice. Some of them are even able to take on positions like, not to call them political positions, but positions at community leadership level, because now through the process, they've also gained a bit more confidence, a bit more income, et cetera. So those are also very important qualitative measurements to take into account.
From my side, over at Acumen, because most of the things we usually screen for and measure are innovations and innovative impact. So you'll find that for us, we'll be looking at how many women are participating better within that value chain by virtue of your innovation or your intervention. Because fundamentally, that's what we fund, which is early stage innovations that break I'd say systematic iniquities that exist within value chains that stop women from participating within that sector. For example, you'll find an increase in income among women as a very interesting indicator that this particular innovation is helping them participate more and create as much value as they can and uplifting their livelihoods. Or diversification of purchasing power, where you find because women are now participating within this value chain, they're buying things like books for their children. So those pieces of information that seem I'd say a second step away is also something I'd suggest you take a good look at.
Thanks a lot. Maybe just a very small addition from my side. In the gender transformative business model innovation guide, we also identify some key areas where we see a business doing gender transformative interventions. So you could also think of building, for example, KPI measuring indicators through the lens of these key areas. So there's something to consider. Thank you so much. We do have quite a lot of questions. So if I may ask our panelists to also help me to make your answer more concise, that would be great, because I think this is such a unique opportunity that we are here that can answer many of the questions from our audience. So I would really like to accommodate as many as possible. The next question is also quite an interesting one. Yeah. So this person was asking any good tips, practices of how to engage men in farming communities from a business perspective in a low cost, in a cost effective way to allow women more space, because this person has used other methodologies, for example, Gauss or household methodology. They are quite expensive. So so this person was asking if you have any tips or suggestions.
Increase community engagement is the best way to go. I think before any program is implemented in any community, take the time to prepare whomever are the gatekeepers of the community. Get them to see why is it so important for women, or in our case, young women, to be engaged, and what are the if you will, potential backlashes that could come out that you address from the very beginning. I think, a much stronger community engagement level would definitely help in bringing men along and also reducing backlash.
Yeah, and maybe to add briefly to this, fully supporting Esther's point. For me, what is also really an important driver of these business models, gender transformative business models, is male allyship. So whilst we are trying to improve the position of women, we do need the men as well. And sometimes we make these programs and say, we want women only, and then men can feel excluded. Whilst, male farmers are not in an easy situation. Their salary might sometimes be higher. They might be a bit more involved in cash crops, but it's still a very tough world. So excluding men is often not a good idea, but tailoring your products to make sure that they meet the needs of women is really, really important. And one of the results that surprised us after looking at a specific portfolio of companies was that the companies who applied a gender transformative lens and approach, we saw that farmers throughout had benefited more than where that gender transformative business model was not applied, just because it was much more focused on the farmer. And interestingly enough, men even benefited more than women. So because they did not have certain barriers. So I think that it is an important point to realize that we can't do without male allyship. So it's a balance to be found there as well. Make sure we reach the women and make it very relevant for them. But if there are a few men between there, that's only good. And I think that that can actually help in the long term.
From my side, I think it's been well covered by Marianne and Caroline. I honestly, maybe I'll say this. It might be a bit contentious, but I'll say it anyway. Marianne mentioned something about land, and when the factors of production are kept away from women, especially in agricultural value chains. I think sometimes there's a need to be as inclusive as possible, but as truthful as possible. That for that transformation to actually occur, we will need them to make certain concessions when it comes to allowing women to actually participate economically within these value chains. I've had the misfortune of having to sit with men who had systematically disenfranchised a community of women in a past life by using inheritance when a patriarch had passed on, and I still maintain that the tone must sometimes be truthful but firm as well. I think that explains the one part I don't think that's been necessarily addressed.
Thanks a lot. We also have questions about responsible sourcing. So this person was asking, have any of the three organizations considered focusing their present or future efforts in a specific part of the supply chain, such as responsible sourcing, which covers not only gender, but also other areas? So in this way, gender is embedded not as a separate topic, but really embedded in this the whole mechanism.
Yeah, so for us as IDH, we take a value chain approach. So we work a lot at the different phases. So yes, procurement is important, but we also focus a lot on enabling farmers to become really these professional farmers and to further develop. So to also ensure that we build the service ecosystem that they need to produce the quantities that give them a decent income. So yeah. In the interest of time and keeping it short, I will leave it there.
From my side at Acumen, yes, but I will make a caveat. Unfortunately, poverty is the business we are in, which is the alleviation of poverty, and it disproportionately affects women. So it does take a massive chunk of our kind of screening to make sure that women are included in the solutions that are proposed by innovators in these spaces that we fund.
Great, thank you. Yes, Esther, you have an additional point to add?
Nope. I was just going to
Okay.
say I agree with both of them.
Yeah, I have a specific question for you though, from our audience.
Okay.
So our
Okay.
audience is asking, they're curious to know if by focusing on young women, so that's also what Mastercard Foundation has also really, promoted this intersectional approach. So they're wondering whether you also have assessed the potential impact of unintended consequences of leaving the needs, for example, older women farmers. Yeah. So they're curious to know what's your thoughts on this.
The first thing I will say is young people are the future of this continent, right? And they have the least voice and they have the least agency. And when you see young women, it's even, if you will, the lack of agency and voice is even bigger. So the idea here is not to leave out young men or older women or older men, but it's rather taking if you will, addressing or building the solution for a future now. And that's by enhancing the ability for young women to be able to contribute both to the growth of their families and the growth of their economies, and therefore Africa as a whole. Our population is 75% below 35. and 50% of that are actually young women. Now, to Caroline's point, I think it's important to understand by us saying we're focusing on young women, it doesn't mean that we're alienating young men in any way, shape, or form, right? But in the process of solutioning for young women, you find ways to integrate young men in the process. And what you find is that if you design the other way around, meaning you design for everybody, young women fall through the cracks some way, somehow. When you design for women as a whole, young women also fall through the cracks, right? So if you're not taking that very intentional approach to design for them, then I think in a few years we might be in a bit of trouble. So, so that's the idea behind focusing specifically on young women first and foremost, to again level the playing field because they're just much further behind.
Thank you, Esther. Perhaps then I have a question for Acumen. Just let me put out the question. Yeah, so how can impact investors like Acumen encourage specific collaboration with local farmers to take the risk in financing agricultural value chains? So this person encourage partnerships across different types of investors. Yeah, so they are curious to know whether how can impact investors like Acumen encourage specific collaboration among different stakeholders.
That's a fantastic question. I think we're already engaged a lot in that. We work a lot with regional investors such as DOB. I think we work a lot with, I think DevCo is also entering the conversation as to collaborative deals that we'll be making as much as they're at a much larger scale. Acumen actively works with other funds across Africa to make sure that we can bring as much value as we can using the tickets that we sign. So it means that if we find a company that's really, really interesting, that's going through a particular fundraise, and we can only participate to a particular extent, then we are also actively speaking to other funds to make sure that they can co-invest with us. We've had several partners. Rabobank is one other one that comes to mind immediately. I think there's one called Goodwill Investments that also comes to mind. So there's different funds that we speak to and talk to about companies that we find exciting or transformative. And we also following on initial investments. And that's the best thing you can possibly do, right? For companies that are within the agricultural sector that are transforming and want to scale their growth. Following on is the best vote of confidence that Acumen can give, or any investor can give. And we've done that consistently. And it speaks to the level of trust that we have with our founders and with participants who are bringing actual value within the chain.
Great, thank you. I don't know whether, yes, let me also put another question. I think this is a new question. So can you share any examples of any norm transformative interventions as part of gender intentional plans that help women producers navigate social cultural norms as well? In a lot of times, gender transformative approaches may yield suboptimal results if social norms are not adequately addressed. Yeah, so it's just asking for some examples about norm transformative interventions.
I can give one example to start with, and I first one note that changing that community perspective or the social and cultural norms is really important, but it is also something that does not change that easily. So often takes a bit more time, and we have done quite a bit of work on gender-based violence, where we have had a community campaign around it, and where we really have seen a big decrease in acceptance of gender-based violence. Marije mentioned the percentages early on. I don't recall them exactly, but from almost everyone finding it acceptable, it transformed to people almost everyone finding it unacceptable. So that is I think a really good example, and I do think we sometimes underestimate the importance of some of those community interventions, and sometimes could be doing a bit more. So I really like the question, and I think it is something that everyone needs to keep very well on their radar. So thanks for that question.
Thank you. I don't know whether our other panelists, Esther, Oscar, has any addition to add.
I think to Caroline's point, it's something that we need to pay more and careful attention to. There is some emerging work coming out of FSD Africa and CGAP on gender norms. And what are even gender norms, by the way, because they differ from one community to the other. And with that, then again, accelerating community engagement and community dialogue becomes very important, because these are almost cultural beliefs that are here that will take a while, if you will, to change, and they cannot change without dialogue. So I think be on the lookout for that, but definitely an important point to focus on and integrate in our work.
No points from my side. I think Caroline and Esther have covered that piece particularly well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so due to the time constraint, we are not able to accommodate all the questions, but I do want to ask the last, multi-million dollar questions as like a, closure for the webinar. Yeah, I'm curious. This is a question for the panelists, right? We are living in the time where gender topic is under attack. We can see it's happening everywhere. So looking to the future, how do you see the role of business in supporting gender equality? And could you give like very briefly 1 or 2 sentences about what you think?
From my side, unfortunately for this forum, as an African participating in African value chains with the context of Africa and an understanding of what Africa needs, gender is not an attack in my book. I think we need to deeply deeply dig in, especially those of us who are working in investment and are given this fantastic opportunity to participate in the next great future of African development, especially among the youth, to create an economy that includes everyone and creates value for everyone in a social and economically proportionate manner, which is what I think, if you have a historical understanding of the context which we live in here in Africa, is a blessing and a dream that many before us have lived for and died for. And so for me, that question, when I saw it, Jiren, I read it, smiled, and then put it aside and kept working. So yeah, that's my feedback.
I'm gonna follow on from Oscar. I could not agree more. And let me say it this way. For Africa, we don't have a choice, right? We don't have a choice. We keep talking about the Africa we want, the transformation, the economic growth, et cetera, How do we do this, right? If a large part of our population is so far behind, if we're not trying to do anything to catapult them forward, we have everything to lose. So from the foundation side, this is what we do, right? We've made this our commitment. It's part of our mission, and we just keep forging on forward, marching forward.
Yeah, and then I will close, and I'm really happy with the answers of Oscar and Esther. And I think being based in the Netherlands, it's sometimes a bit more difficult to escape that news flow. But what I have seen, you can give it the power that you want. And I think it is what I have seen happening and what keeps me going is actually that I have been able to connect with a lot of like-minded people who keep doing what they know and think is best, and forces us to be a bit more focused and collaborate more, because yeah, sometimes the environment is definitely a bit harder. There's obviously an effect on funding flows. But I like the commitment from a lot of people that work in this sector. And I think together we can make a really big difference. And I'm definitely committed to that. So yeah, let me pause there.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. I just want to say a big thank you for our panelists who are being with us today. You share so much great insights, examples, data, and I think that really build a strong case of to encouraging us to go on this journey to really contribute to this cause. And I also want to say thank you to our audience who are actively engaged in the conversation. I can see so much good intention. There's so much energy there. And yeah, just want to say big thank you, and let's stay connected, and let's keep joining this force together. We're working on the same cause, so let's connect it. If you have any questions, you want to learn more about IDH gender work, please get in contact with me and my colleague. And after this webinar, we will send you the recording and also the slide deck. So thank you very much again for being with us today, and I wish you a lovely rest of the day.